I'm with Gurcharan Das, public intellectual, writer, a former CEO of Procter & Gamble, who for the last 25 years has been writing several books. And this is his latest. It's called Karma, The Riddle of Desire, a trilogy. The first book was about Artha, material well-being. The second about Dharma, spiritual well-being or moral well-being. And this is about Karma, about desire, lust, pleasure.
And emotional well-being.
And emotional well-being. So tell us about this book and what is the value of love and lust and desire in our everyday lives?
Well, I think, we are very happy to talk about the economy,
right,
our democracy.
Yes.
But we are very reluctant to talk about the emotional life.
Mm-hmm.
And just as we have emotional lives,
yes,
so does a nation.
Okay.
So in a sense...
but this is not about a nation's emotional life.
No,
right?
not
it's
really.
It's about an individual sort of desires. Or,
right, but the emotional life matters also. We've had this great judgment from the Supreme Court.
On Section 377?
Yes, and that's going to change the emotional life
in
of
what
the
way?
nation.
In what way?
Well, I think it's going to make us, it's going to educate our people that homosexuality is as natural as heterosexuality.
And you were telling me your own son is gay.
Yes, and so after the judgment came last Thursday at 12:35 p.m.
Okay.
And at 12:36, I was no longer afraid to talk publicly about my son being gay, because I was always afraid that he might get into trouble.
Right.
For that. So
you're celebrating the judgment by the esteemed Supreme Court justices.
Yes,
but
yes.
Are you also saying that these justices perhaps should have looked at the Indian tradition a little bit more?
Yes, I think that's also correct, that we forget that we had a very exuberant tradition. India is the only civilization in the world which elevated karma to a goal of life.
Right.
And karma means desire and pleasure, both. And the way I work in this book is that I have a story.
Right.
It's a fictional memoir.
Yes.
Story of someone called Amar.
Yes.
And it's written in the first person, so it's very easy to confuse.
But just before we go to the book, and let's just finish with Section 377. You were saying that the esteemed 5 Supreme Court judges did not draw upon the Indian tradition of lust and desire and pleasure.
Right. That's right. And I think they were probably not familiar with it. And most Indians are not familiar with it. The fact is that...
Well, did that surprise you that they didn't draw upon it?
Well, they didn't know about it, probably. I don't know whether they hadn't read Sanskrit sources.
They must have read the Mahabharata, which is full of these stories.
Yeah, Mahabharata is quite a lot, but they didn't quote. I don't know why they didn't quote.
Sure,
I don't think that's important.
Okay.
What is important is that in the Christian tradition, in the beginning was light. In the Rig Veda, in the beginning was desire, and the cosmos was created from the seed of desire in the mind of the One. And so I asked the question in this book, what does it say about a civilization where in the beginning was desire?
So what does it say?
Well, I think for one thing, our ancestors realized that karma is the source of all action. If you didn't have desire, you wouldn't wake up in the morning.
That's right.
It's the source of creation. It's the source of procreation. And so it is all. And so...
So it's not just sexual pleasure or...
Yes, it's all kinds of pleasure. But generally, like the English word desire, karma refers to 80% of the texts refer to sexual pleasure.
Okay.
And but you're right. I mean, the pleasure of good food, the pleasure of good music, the pleasure from a good painting, all these have to do with karma.
So do you think that Indians are conflicted about pleasure?
Well, of course, they're conflicted. I mean, we blame the British, the Victorian
That's
middle
right.
class morality.
Yes.
But in fact, 2,500 years ago, in the forests, those yogis, the Jains, the Buddhists, the Buddha himself, they had a lot of problem with desire. You know all these stories of rishis, and suddenly
Renunciation.
an apsara comes into their head, and there's a sudden involuntary ejaculation, and 1,000 years of meditation goes down the drain.
That's right.
So
Shiva does this himself.
well, yes, and Shiva gets very angry.
But we listen, as we grow up listening to all these stories about Krishna playing with Radha, who's a married woman, with all these thousands of gopis. And even though these are stories, these are mythologies, but we do grow up with them, right?
Yeah.
And yet when we grow up, we're told that you have to follow the straight
Well,
and narrow.
so what I was going to say is
Sure.
that we've had a tradition of karma pessimism and a karma optimism right throughout our history. So as I told you, these rishis and renouncers were the pessimists, but we had our karma optimists, the one who wrote in the courts, who wrote Sanskrit love poetry,
Right.
who wrote the Kama Sutra, who put those sculptures on the temples at Khajuraho.
Yes.
They were karma optimists. So and frankly, there was a struggle between the two right through history, but there was a grand compromise somewhere in between,
Which is what?
which is what I would call karma realists. The karma realists said sex is okay as long as it's within marriage.
Right.
So they didn't approve of celibacy, which is what the renouncer wanted, and this is where I think Gandhi got it all wrong. I mean, Nehru was a karma optimist
Okay.
with all his affairs.
What do you think Gandhi
And
was?
Gandhi was a karma pessimist, definitely. I mean, and it wasn't. I don't blame him alone,
Right.
because he was very deeply influenced by Tolstoy, and Tolstoy was a real karma pessimist.
So what does the Manusmriti do then? What does it do to a woman's desire?
Well, Manusmriti actually is a pretty nasty
Business.
business. There are some moments of great insight, but fundamentally it has a negative view of women. As the renouncers had, as Buddha Charita of Ashwagosha has, Manusmriti says a woman has an insatiable appetite, and we have to control it. And since we can't look after her for 24 hours, we have to teach her to control it herself.
Right.
Which means that we have they create stories of Sita and Savitri and all
Right.
to brainwash.
Yes.
So on her own, she will not feel that. India is not the only culture, by the way, where women have this sort of.
Right.
But patriarchy is the basic
Yes.
issue.
You spoke about Sita, and I'm just wondering if your view of Ram, the fact is that he makes her go through the sort of this sacrificial fire, or this purifying fire where she needs to purify herself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was, I think, quite wrong. I mean, the between Sita, who is really the symbol of conjugal love, and Radha, who is a symbol of erotic love, I'd any day take Radha. And so would all the poets of the Gupta period,
Right.
Kalidasa and Bhartrihari and Amaru. We have this, and frankly, my book, Jyoti, poses questions for us today.
What are these questions?
And for example, let me give you one typical dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the hero of this story, Amar.
Mm-hmm.
He is slogged his life, he has climbed ladders in his company, he and his wife, he loves his wife and family, but by God it's taken its toll. She has lost desire by then. Bringing up children has been tough. And so in his 40s, he sees a beautiful woman who comes and sits next nearby to him on the Deccan Queen going to Pune from GT Central and Bombay Central. And sure enough, both of them are attracted to each other. And it's pretty clear that they would have an affair.
Mm-hmm.
But he agonizes and he thinks, now, what will happen if I have this affair? One, it will destroy my marriage. Two, it will hurt the children. But then he says, children, well, they'll anyway grow up and go away. So he's not so concerned about that. But yet he knows if he ignores them, they'll never let him forget it. So maybe he should keep this affair secret.
Right.
But then he says, if I keep it secret, I'll have to lie. And lies will have to pile up with lies. And pretty soon I'll become an inauthentic human being. So then he says, maybe I shouldn't have an affair. But then he says, if he doesn't have an affair, he will always resent this one last thrilling chance of happiness, a certain kind of happiness. He may end up as a dried, old, shriveled man as a result. So what is this telling us? Here is a classic conflict between karma and dharma. Karma is duty to yourself and dharma is duty to another.
To society.
Now we are reminded, with your wife, to your children, everybody. So we are always reminded about our duty to others, about dharma. But nobody reminds us that we also have a duty to ourselves. So now in this case, frankly, this is a lose-lose. No matter which action he takes,
so what's the moral of the story then in the book?
Well, this is exactly, that's why it's called the riddle. Karma, the riddle of desire.
So in this
particular... So there are lots of riddles running right through the book. And so I think that's what makes for, in some ways, the greatness of our tradition. Just as I found that in the book, The Difficulty of Being Good, there were no answers very often to these conflicts between karma and dharma and so on.
Right.
Similarly here, there are no easy answers. You have to work it out for yourself, how you're going to do it and what you're going to do. But this is what Mahabharata calls the melancholic human condition.
On this note, Mr. Gurcharan Das, thank you so much for speaking to The Print. This is Jyoti Malhotra for The Print.